Hey, John from Mighty here, and in this video, I'm excited to walk through with you our new custom code updates that we've made to that power up, including the ability to import and export snippets, and I'll show you exactly how the scoped feature works, where you can scope either this to the course itself, or to a lesson, or to a block, and how all that works, maybe some do's and don'ts when it comes to utilizing some CSS selectors like we've talked about in the past. And then we'll jump over into the Maestro community. We're going to be able to see tons of different snippets that you can just go ahead and grab and then leverage inside of your custom code feature. So let's dive in and I'll show you how that works. All right, so as we dive into a course, you'll always see the power up menu either at this course cover page, or if you're inside a lesson, just always look for this power up. And this will launch you into the custom code tab, where you'll see just a fun empty state that allows you to either create your first snippet or import a snippet. We'll talk about importing here in a little bit, but let's just dive into creating our first snippet, just so you can kind of get a feel for how this works. So we're going to go ahead and create the first snippet. This will pull you up into our snippet edit view, where you can see your course preview over here on the right-hand side. And then on the left-hand side is where you would be able to apply your CSS, your JavaScript, decide how you want to scope this, be able to edit your snippet, mark it as enabled, or if you want to have it there deactivated, you could certainly do that as well. And that's how you get your first snippet. So actually, I'm just going to save this, and we'll go back to the main list view. So that way you can kind of see like, okay, cool, we've got a snippet created. Right here on this page, now that we've got our first snippet created, this is where you can actually go and like preview all of your snippets. Like, let's say you've got 4 or 5 different snippets you've made, and you want to like see, okay, well, maybe they're conflicting with each other. You can just uncheck some and it will deactivate them for you. So it's just kind of a fun little view to see how all of these snippets work in conjunction with each other. So good overview. This is more or less what you'd see if you were on like the preview tab or published to Review 360 or just published in general as an export. So we're going to go ahead and enable that back. We're going to go jump back into our snippet. And I just want to kind of high level talk through those features of scoping. So as I mentioned, we've got scoping for your entire course. And generally what that's going to do is just add CSS and JavaScript to your course as soon as it loads. Whatever you do in there is just going to work across your entire course. It's not scoped. It's not focused on anything specific. This is more or less how our old custom code feature worked. Because things became unruly, we decided, one, to allow you to split it up into snippets, just so that way you can have bite-sized organization of your custom code. But we've also allowed you to scope it, because as we started to build up this whole library of our code catalog, people were building block-specific changes that they wanted to make. But that's a little bit hard in Rise, because Rise has this whole single page application style where blocks get created and destroyed. And then you have to write mutation observer. Like, it's just a whole crazy mess. So you don't have to do any of that anymore. So that's where these scopes come into play. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to scope this to a lesson, which then will bring up the list of all of our lessons that we have available inside of our course. If you have a ton of lessons, you can certainly search for those. But we're just going to go ahead and apply this to, let's just say, the demo side of this course, which I think that's the lesson I'm in. We'll see that here in a little bit. And then when I go to write out either my CSS or JavaScript, it will automatically apply my CSS as an example for that lesson. So it'll scope it in there. I don't have to do any of the scoping work for that. Or when we're running the JavaScript side of things, it will, one, pass in a lesson ID, so I could actually take advantage of that if I wanted to. And two, that code is only going to run when we go inside of this lesson. So it's not going to run as soon as the course loads and wait for us to get into it. Like, it's just none of the code even exists. It gets added, and then when you leave the lesson, that JavaScript gets destroyed. And then if you come back to the lesson, it gets re-added. So you're also going to want to make sure that the code you write works so that it can be added and destroyed and re-added again. Another phrase is idempotent. So making sure that your code can just rerun and it knows if it already ran or didn't run, and just be aware of that, because there's a lot of things that you can certainly do with the JavaScript side of things. And if you're not aware that this is going to end up rerunning every time you go in and out of the lesson, could end up reporting things or doing things that you didn't anticipate. So just be aware of that. Same conceptually goes with the blocks. So in the block, again, you have a whole block selector. These are all those block IDs. You can search by the block ID, and I'll show you how to get those here in a second. And we'll give you a little bit of like a narration on, the block type, similar to what we do with our quick sort feature. So you can also still just go over here and get access to those block IDs. But what's cool is you can also just select specific blocks as you're jumping in and around your course, just to make this process easier. So you don't always have to like go and find the block ID and then come back here. You can just do like what you've been always doing, copying the block ID from this side panel or just hitting that checkbox. So you can certainly do all that as well. But yeah, this will basically just load every block across all of your lessons that you've got in your course. So also kind of convenient. Similar to what we had just talked about with the lesson side of things, the CSS that we generate here is going to be specifically scoped for those blocks that we chose. And I'll show examples of that here in a second. And then same with the JavaScript. That JavaScript is going to only run when that block appears. And then when that block goes away, like you jump to a different lesson, or maybe it's hidden behind a continue button, so you don't quite see it yet, the JavaScript will only run once that becomes available. And then once you leave the lesson, it will get destroyed. So again, be smart about how you're writing that JavaScript. If you only want this to run one time, maybe just use a course scoped JavaScript where you are still managing and figuring out when that block comes into view and doing something. But if this is an example where we've shown this example of dropping confetti when you click a continue button, well, you can just do that now, scope to that block. We know that that block really only actually gets clicked one time, because once you continue past that, you never actually see the continue button again. So you can rely on that functionality to only really attach when that continue button gets rendered into the view and gets clicked. So we can go ahead and start to dive into some examples, but I really wanted to first highlight how the snippets work. You get the list view, that empty state, and then being able to enable, disable from the preview tab, and then walk you really through how all those different scopes work. So the last high level feature before I dive into very specifics is the import export. So let's say you've got a snippet that you've created and you love it, you want to reuse it amongst many of your courses. Just go to the more menu here on this list view, hit export, and what that will do is it will download a JSON file, which is just a good way for development information to get shared. And that JSON file you can store, maybe share amongst your team internally of all the various snippets that you want to manage. And then when you're ready to re-import that in your course, you would just come back into this list, and I'll just go kind of go back to our empty state here. And then you can click the import button, and then we can just import that snippet into your course here. So we see that it automatically takes us back into this edit panel here. You'll want to make sure you save this or rename it. It will come into your course as well as deactivated, just to make sure that this is something that you want to keep. So just make sure you re-enable that, so that way you've got access and it will actually run when you're running your course. So just be aware of that. It starts as a deactivated snippet. So anywho, let's go back and actually create a snippet, and we're gonna use something fun from the community. All right, so let's dive specifically into this confetti drop, because this is always a fun one to show off, and there are many ways to use it. So I went into our Maestro community, which is free to join. If you go to the Mighty Code catalog section, there's this adding confetti drop to your course card, where you can just go and download the general snippet that we use. So I'm going to go ahead and download that, and then we'll go into here and import this snippet. And you'll see once we import this snippet that there's some JavaScript here that basically just adds in the Canvas Confetti script to our course. And then there's a function here that more or less just drops confetti on our course. And then what we do, I'll just move me out of the way, is that we just attach this to a custom code object called Confetti Launcher. Maybe this is a great way for you to just organize how you want to call specific code. You can certainly do that here, and I'll show you how to leverage that here in just a second. But we're going to go ahead and enable this. I'm going to go ahead and leave all of the title and description stuff here. If you wanted to change that, you could click it and update your title and description. But we're going to go ahead and save this. And so we'll go back. I want to preview all. We'll move me back down here. And I want to just show you that if I inspect this window, which this is just kind of our iframe window, and I go to the console tab, and let me just clear this out just so it doesn't look noisy. And then I just type in custom code, which you'll see autocomplete already had that. Here's that confetti launcher. And then if I just run that function, you'll see here confetti happens on our course behind us. So that's super cool. This is just a general course JavaScript that gets ran, adds the confetti library, and then allows me to call it whenever I want to call it. So great use of that snippet. Now we can go in and create a specific snippet for triggering that confetti. So what I want to do in this situation is when we're in this course here for a specific block, like this block here. So again, just choose the block scope, choose this block using this checkbox. You'll see it automatically selects this in the targets. We can go to the JavaScript section, and what we can do is we can say when the button gets clicked, which I'll write that here in just a second. When the button gets clicked, we want to trigger this confetti, because I know that a continue button really only shows up before you've continued anything on, and then it never shows up again. All right, so here's all the code that I wrote, and I want to show off this test. So at the very top, we've got a console log just saying that it's running. And then I want to show off a couple of variables that you've got for free with the block scoped targets. And that is the block ID, which is a string and is the ID that you had selected here, in case if there's anything that you actually need for that. And then you also have access to the block element. And this is the overarching block div that wraps this. So that way you can do something fun like on line 3, where you can just query inside of this element for a specific button in this situation here, versus having to know the block ID and then go and query the entire course for that specific block button. You don't have to do any of that anymore. You actually just pass in the block element. You can query a specific button out of that element. And then once you've got access to that button, in this situation here, when you click this button, we want to just call the confetti launcher, and that launches your confetti. So super cool. Let's go ahead and run this and see how that works. So I'm going to click run. We'll scroll down to this button, click it, and there's the confetti, which is super cool. Now let's look at the console logs. So that way you can see what all is actually happening here. So here's our, this is running. And then we've got the string, that ID. And then we also actually have the element itself. But what's fun is that you're not going to see this here, because at this point now, the way that Rise works is the continue button gets hidden from the DOM as soon as it gets clicked. So this element you might not be able to find, but you can see here that that is the element that it was referencing when querying out that specific button. So now, if I were to leave this lesson and go, forward and then back to this lesson, all of this logic is going to run again. However, the way, again, the continue button works is it actually isn't visible ever again. So I don't have to worry about the confetti firing twice. It'll still set up the click listener event, and then it's done because nothing else actually happens. All right, so let's go ahead and just name this. We can save this out. This is going to be our lesson 2 continue button confetti. I don't really need a description, so I'm going to go ahead and save that out. We'll go ahead and save this. And now we've got both of those snippets. Might be worth noting, you'll notice that right now, these are all sorted by last modified at. And then we move all the deactivated ones to the bottom of this list. There may be a future update that you run into where these are actually ordered by priority, but right now they're sorted by the updated date. All right. Hopefully you guys are still with me. This has been a long video. Obviously, there's a lot to talk through. The last thing that I really want to touch on is how CSS works and some do's and don'ts there. All of this information is also documented in our Help Center. So you can go ahead and click this help icon. This will open up our Help Center, which has all of this great information about course level, lesson level, block level, scopes, and then what injection looks like for the lesson and for the block levels. And here is where it really defines more of like how we wrap your code when we are doing either lesson or block level. So here's where you can kind of see the block element or the block ID, or if we were up top, that lesson ID, how those get injected in, you'd be able to just leverage those because we automatically wrap it using a nice try catch so you don't accidentally write code that breaks it. And then the bottom part here, which we're about to talk about with CSS, is that we actually automatically wrap your CSS to scope it either based on the lesson or lessons that you selected or based on the block. So only targeting that specific block ID. And now you don't need to do that anymore when you write your CSS. Some blocks don't hurt if you do that because they actually duplicate the block ID nested within it. Not all blocks do that. So just be aware that, as an example down here again in the documentation, you don't actually need to say like data block ID. And then if you were going to do the paragraph tag to make it all red, you don't need to do that anymore. You could literally just say P curly brace color red and you're done. And it will automatically wrap that inside of that specific block. So you don't need to do it. All right, so let's go over and do some examples of that. So again, we're just going to go and add a snippet. And we are going to just find a block that we want to update some styling on. Like maybe this one's a good one here, where I don't think we have a mod right now that changes these little soft edges around so this is the embed block. So around that embedded card, there's not really anything that changes that to be more like a harsh or a 0 border radius type thing. So we can go ahead and do that. We're going to drop this down to the block scope, and we are going to select this specific block. Again, you can either copy this block ID from wherever, come in here and search for it, or you can just literally hover over and check the checkbox. Super convenient. And then you just need to figure out exactly what that CSS is to change the border radius. So I'm going to go ahead and do that real quick. All right, so they use this embed item class, and then we can just say border radius is 0. And you'll see, oops, well, if I don't type random characters, that worked there, made that a little harsher. Or if you want to go super extreme, we can make it very rounded. Like either way, whatever you want to do there is all good. But what's sweet is that you don't have to type in the block ID anymore. It's automatically targeted. The example of this is, let me save this. We're going to actually go back out. We're going to duplicate this block here. And then we'll go back into our power-ups. We're going to edit this snippet. And you should see that there's 2 embeds, one with harsh or rounded radius and another one with more of that subtle style. And then what's cool is you could literally just go in and check this checkbox too. And then we will save this and preview. And you'll notice that it will apply to both. So there you go. All right, so as you guys can see, there's a lot going on with custom code, and I've just really scratched the surface. I'm planting ideas on how you guys can implement all sorts of fun CSS or JavaScript without your course. You can do the whole import export and manage that across your teams. We've got the whole Maestro Community with the code catalog that you can go and grab snippets from. And if you ever have any issues at all, feel free to jump in there. There's a support channel as well as just our general mighty user space. Feel free to ping me. I love jumping in on calls with you guys, teaching you about how you can go about reading some of the DOM structure within your RISE course and figure out exactly how to get that CSS or JavaScript to work. And we'll get that up and running for you. So thanks everyone, and we'll continue to make great improvements. See ya.